Let's dive into this chapter here, Jamie. This is a really short chapter, although there is a lot of like scheming behind the scenes. So this is one of
Oh,
those,
yes.
sometimes I call these like bridge chapters where it kind of like it spins the web out a little bit more, even though like there's not a lot going on directly
There's a
in.
lot of character development for Sansa. We get a lot of
Yeah.
signifiers and road signs from George that things are about to change for her. And
Yeah.
honestly, it's funny because I think
It's a big foreshadowing chapter too.
huge foreshadowing chapter, but I think on a first read through or a surface level read, you would say, hey, things are looking up for Sansa. She's going to get married. She got to dress from the queen. She's not with Joffrey anymore. But George is actually in the undercurrent of this chapter showing you that her life is so sad and
Yeah.
so terrible. I would say it's probably an upgrade from Joffrey, but at the same time, it is just horrible how people are treating her from every side, even Dantos.
Yeah. All right, here we go. So Sansa is being fitted for a new gown provided by Queen Cersei. Marjorie tells Sansa that she does not fear Joffrey because her father only conceded her hand in marriage with the provision that Loras was named to the Kingsguard. Her brother will protect her from Joffrey. When Sansa tells Dantos about the Queen of Thorns' plans to marry her to Willis, the drunk man warns her that the Tyrells wish to wed her for her claim to Winterfell, stating, "These Tyrells are only Lannisters with flowers." Dantos tells her that they will escape as promised on Joffrey's wedding day. So this chapter, again, it's actually it's kind of short, so we'll probably read actually like quite a bit of it here. Here we go. So a new gown, she said, as wary as she was astonished. More lovely than any of you have worn, my lady, the old woman promised. She measured Sansa's hips with a length of knotted string, all silk and Mirish lace with satin linings. You will be very beautiful. The queen herself has commanded it. Which queen? Marjorie was not yet Joff's queen, but she had been Renly's. Or did she mean the Queen of Thorns or the Queen Regent, to be sure? Queen Cersei, none other. She has honored me with her custom for many a year. The old woman laid a string along the inside of Sansa's leg. Her grace said to me that you are a woman now, and you should not dress like a little girl. Hold out your arm. Sansa lifted her arm. She needed a new gown. That was true. She had grown 3 inches in the past year, and most of her old wardrobe had been ruined by the smoke when she tried to burn her mattress on the day of her first flowering. Your bosom will be as lovely as the queen's, the old woman had said as she looped her string around Sansa's chest. You should not hide it. So you should not hide it. So the comment made her blush. Yet the last time she'd gone riding, she could not lace her jerkin all the way up to the top, and the stable boy gaped at her, as he helped her to mount. Sometimes she caught grown men looking at her chest as well, and some of the tunics were so tight she could scarce breathe in them.
So when you read that part, obviously Sansa is going through puberty. She's becoming a woman. Um, what do you take from that? Like when you read that?
So there's a lot actually to unpack here, and some of the things I found in the old forums and things like that are like some of the most insane breakdowns I've seen of this. So there's actually George actually does an amazing job here at hinting at so many different things going on. It's actually kind of insane. To be to be honest, like this is one of those chapters you can actually come back to much later. And here we are in a reread. We know what's going to happen and pick this apart. And it's like George, this is probably a chapter in all honesty that George wrote like towards the end of the way he writes the books and things like that. He's like, I need like a chapter in between. So on one hand, she's getting this new dress and she doesn't know exactly where it's coming from. It's talking about Sansa going through puberty, and at the same time, this old woman is here, and this old woman is like checking out her legs, and it's talking a little bit about her hips and things like that. So, like the subtext of this is actually like an heir is what is going to be coming this, and we'll get into this later, where it seems like actually the Tyrells are viewing this as potential of Sansa giving them Winterfell. Because if you're the Tyrells and you're playing chess, if you get Sansa, you'll have the Reach and Winterfell, like regardless of what happens with Joffrey or anything. But if you get Joffrey too, you've now got a foothold in basically all of Westeros, because you've got the North, You've got over here, if you look, I'll pull up a map too. But I mean, and then King's Landing, you've got like the southeast, the southwest, and the north. I mean, Westeros isn't, it's large, but you look at where the kingdoms are, some are bigger than others. So the reach in the north are massive, and then the crown land, obviously, the power you'd have there, that's essentially all of Westeros. That would also, let me pull up a map here too. Just I think it helps emphasize it. But your thoughts, Jimmy, while I get this pulled up here.
Well, so when I first read this, I was like, "Oh, George, what a old dude way of talking about a girl growing up." Well, her bosom's growing, her hips are growing. But like you said, when I sat there and thought about it a little bit more, because George can be voyeuristic at times in his writing, I was like, no, I think he's hinting at something a lot deeper than this. But before I go into what I think it's actually hinting at in the story here, I just wanted to say that going through this time as a female is the most vulnerable, awkward time of your life. And she is being used and pivoted by so many different people, which makes all the things that are happening so much worse for her. Like her most formative years of ruined. Um, so I think even from a character perspective, I think we're supposed to take it in the fact that, there's a lot of stuff going on internally with Sansa that doesn't even have to do with the terrible stuff that's happened to her family, but it's on top of that.
Yeah, and I'll pull up another map too, but I do kind of like this one. I never really get a chance to use it. So yeah, I mean, you look over here, right, and you've got like the reach. I mean, I think people kind of forget sometimes just about how large the reach actually is, and just really, I mean, in all honesty, it's like Dorne is like sometimes we kind of forget like Dorne is honestly like kind of cut off. I mean, like it's not even just that Dorne doesn't want anything to do with the Seven Kingdoms. It's like you really have to go over these mountains to get there. And so it really is just kind of cut off, and it's easy for them to not really have anything to do with the rest of Westeros.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if they get the reach, if they get like the north, because they could now have Sansa, and then you look over here, I mean, this marriage to Sansa, marriage to Willis would be like the ultimate chess piece for them, because the Lannisters wouldn't even be able to do anything battle wise because they'd be cornered.
I agree. And it is very odd that the Tyrell seems so confident that Sansa will be the heir. So what is that telling us right here? What could you possibly extrapolate from where we are in the book in the chapters that we've been reading? You can extrapolate a very interesting piece of information. The Tyrells knew that the Red Wedding was going to happen right here.
Oh yeah,
because Robb Stark and Sansa even thinks she's like, oh well, there's Robb, but Robb is off. He'll be doing his own thing. We can honestly assume, because remember the phrase of left. They said we've been disgraced. Our house has been disgraced at the end of Clash of Kings when Arya's leaving Harrenhal. I think the Tyrells were sure Robb Stark was going to die. I think the Tyrells at this moment knew about the Red Wedding.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And honestly, it's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, really, you go back to our last week, or well, it was the last time we did, or actually, I wasn't there for it. It was the one you did with Joanna, but it was that Catelyn chapter, and I re-listened to it before last week's Jon chapter 2.
Yeah,
and yeah, I mean, they knew that once Jon married Jane Westerling, it sort of screwed it. I mean, it just screws. Excuse me. Yeah, once Robb, marries Jane Westerling, it just screws everything up.
Yeah, and we talked about the timeline and how that actually had taken place, before Catelyn knew. She was locked in the tower. Other people in Westeros have known for a while. But I would not be surprised if the Tyrells were clued in or had an inkling that there was a good chance Sansa was going to be the last Stark remaining.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just crazy to think about, dude.
Yeah. And that
because I've always said the Tyrells seem like good people, but I think Dantos is right. They're Lannisters with flowers. Like they really are. They're playing the game too. And just because Marjorie's being nice to the people we like right now doesn't mean that they have the best of intentions.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, I guess it's the subtext, right? You could really begin looking at it in that Catelyn chapter where Rob comes back, he's got this wife, this is bad, and now here we're getting the another side of it, but you're hearing about it. Yeah, they're thinking it's time to move, which is kind of crazy because in some ways you would imagine that the Tyrells would know about it. You would think that the royal family is keeping that very close to, like, nobody else really is going to know about it. You know what I mean? Like the Lannisters are gonna keep that, like, to themselves.
And who's to say that, a little birdie didn't tell, or there's definitely a chance that maybe they just have an inkling of what's going on. It's not like Tywin sat down and said, "Now listen, Olenna, we're gonna poison, or we're gonna kill Robb Stark at a family dinner," because also they deny it because it's a horrible look on the house's honor, right? It is the worst thing you could do in Westeros, I think. So I'm definitely going a little far, but it feels like the Tyrells feel confident that Robb Stark is not going to be around and not going to win, clearly.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And there's more into it here, and we'll dive in here too. So it kind of continues on here, and she's asking a little bit more about the dress, right? She said, like, your bosom will look as lovely as the queen's. The comment made her blush. Then it talks about the thing. What color will it be? She asks the seamstress. Leave the colors to me, my lady. You'll be pleased. I know you will. You shall have small clothes and hose as well, kirtles and mantles and cloaks, and all else befitting a lovely young lady of noble birth. Will they be ready in time for the king's wedding? Oh, sooner, much sooner. Her grace insists. I have 6 seamstress and 12 apprentice girls, and we have all set our other work aside for this. Many ladies will be cross with us, but it was the queen's command. Thank her grace kindly for her thoughtfulness, Sansa said politely. She is too good to me. Her grace is most generous, the seamstress agreed, as she gathered up her things and took their leave. But why? Sansa wondered. When she was alone, it made her uneasy. I'll wager this gown is Marjorie's doing somehow, or her grandmother's. So the really kind of interesting thing about this dress too is that we know that actually the importance of this dress is the purple wedding.
That's where she'll be wearing it, where people will assume her and Tyrion poisoned Joffrey.
Yeah, that's why it's so important for all these people. Now, now that's kind of also interesting too, because if Sansa hadn't escaped, do the Tyrells really want Winterfell? Because if Sansa doesn't escape with Littlefinger, is she going to be killed? Is Cersei going to kill her?
I think Cersei definitely would have tried. But also, would Sansa have been accused had she been present? I don't think they would have. I think they would have just blamed Tyrion.
See, I don't know. I think that's obviously what Olenna must think.
Yeah, I think Olenna saw a way, like, assuming she's the one who poisoned Joffrey. I don't think that there is any way that she would have.
Because we still don't know who did it in the.
That's right. I think Olenna is probably a pretty fair guess. I think that's reasonable. But I don't think that Sansa would have been accused had she not gone missing. I think her going missing was definitely an indicator. I mean, it's not great timing, you could say. It's not the best.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's continue on here a little bit. So here, after even she gets the dress right, and she thinks it gets Marjorie or her grandmother, she goes back and she's saying, Marjorie's kindness has been unfailing, and her presence changed everything. Her ladies, person. Exactly. And here it's almost like Sansa is still in that sort of not really realizing the way the world actually works type of a thing.
I think still she's so desperate to have someone on her side that she is just like.
It had been so long since she had enjoyed the company of other women, had almost forgotten how pleasant it could be. Lady Leonard gave her lessons on the high harp. Lady Janna shared all of the choice gossip. Mary Crane had always had an amusing story. And little Lady Bulwer reminded her of Arya, though not so fierce. Closest to Sansa's own age were the cousins Eleanor, Alla, and Mega Tyrells from junior branches of the house. Roses from lower on the bush, quipped Eleanor, who was witty and willowy. Mega was round and loud. Alla shy and pretty, but Eleanor ruled the three by right of womanhood. She was a maiden, flowered, whereas Mega and Alla were all girls. So it kind of just continues on here a little bit, and she's just kind of talking about these characters, and I don't even think these
So,
characters show up again.
well, we're into the Mega, right? We're talking about the
Right.
cousins. They
Yeah.
do matter. This is setting up what we see with the High Septon whenever it's accused that Marjorie had
Oh,
been
right.
sleeping with her cousins.
Right.
And at the end of the paragraph says Sansa wondered what Mega would think about kissing the Hound, because she's thinking about Mega kissing
Right.
Marjorie as she had. He'd come to her the night of the battle, stinking of wine and blood. He kissed me and threatened to kill me and made me sing him a song, which is an unreliable narrator because that's not how that happened.
Correct.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
That's one thing we've never talked about, the unkiss. You and I have never actually dove into that and what we think about it.
So why do you think she has this memory?
I think it's because Sansa. That's a good. Honestly, this whole deal to me is always sort of. I've always sort of viewed the Hound kiss as one. I don't think anything's ever really going to come of it. I think the whole purpose of it is Sansa's whole role is that she loves the songs. She loves the stories. She loves the idea of gallant knights and damsels in distress and good kings and queens and court and everything. Yeah, exactly. And in reality, that's not the way the world works. And that's sort of one of the reasons she's honestly one of my favorite characters. And I think in the show, I think Sophie Turner is like perfect as Sansa Stark. And I actually think she kind of wins the whole thing. To me, she comes out the best in the show.
Yeah, if they just had not done the whole Ramsay bit, it would have been a lot better. Right.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's the way they did it but at the same time, yeah,
I do think she at the end of it all, where people are,
right,
she kind of got what she wanted the most.
But to me, I how do I phrase this without that? To me, it's adversity. I mean, to me, it makes I don't, whether they decided to do it or not, obviously, whether they should have done it, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's still somebody who overcame something absolutely terrible and still found a way to achieve things and still found a way to fight and still found a way to climb the ranks for herself and like push through all that adversity. And I mean, bad things happen to characters in stories, and then that's the thing, overcoming that adversity is the thing that makes them great. And why Sansa is one of my favorite characters in the whole thing.
So
that I loved her ending. But I think going back to that that's with the Hound, that's kind of the way Sansa's story, I think, is also going to progress in the books, is that she's gonna continue to learn the Game of Thrones, continue to learn these things, that the stories and everything she thought is not the way the world works. I think the kiss thing is probably going to come back up at some point later, and she's going to be like, that's not even the way that went.
Yeah. So a few things. So one of the more interesting things about this passage is that people think that Sansa she's doing a lot of stuff subconsciously in this chapter. She's actually thinking about Arya 2 or 3 times in this chapter, while saying that Arya wasn't a good, Arya didn't suit as a sister at all. At one point, she says that while dreaming of Arya, comparing someone around her to Arya, even with the backhanded compliment, is not as fierce. So there's a lot of subconscious things going on with Sansa that maybe she's not willing to admit or she's not ready to admit. And some people, I think, point to the fact that she is imagining kissing the Hound, that maybe she had actually wanted to, or she wouldn't have minded as much. Right. She would never admit that, though, because he's not a gallant, beautiful knight. Just like Arya is not the perfect, Barbie doll sister. And there's like a comparison between Arya not being the prototypical sister and the Hound not being the prototypical knight. And that at the end of the day, that's actually what she's going to end up wanting. And there is a theory that the Hound and Sansa end up together at the end of the series, which I think is somewhat interesting. It's always a little weird because of the age thing. And I think that is the reason for the lie. I think the lie is that she is not willing to admit in her conscious mind that maybe she would have been okay with that. It's weird. It's really weird. And I think another thing with like show Sansa, I agree that like overcoming that stuff is like super duper important for a character. The problem is, and this is a problem with TV, I shouldn't say a problem, but this is a trope that's happened now in fantasy over and over and over again. And it's because people have missed the point, I think, of George's work. And they actually miscorrelate the show and the books. This happens all the time. I just threw my pencil across the room on accident. So there seems to be a default that whenever you want a female character to seem strong and overcome something, that rape ends up being the default. And I think that there's a very specific reason why George didn't do this in the books and they did it in the show. I think that Dan and Dave didn't understand Sansa's character. And George is saying, why would I do that to this character? Look at everything that's already happened to her. She saw her dad get decapitated. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty to overcome. And I think that Dan and Dave lost sight of a lot of the groundwork that was laid in the earlier seasons.
And we're just trying to do something for like the most shot. That I mean, honest to God, I'll say it, that's my single most least favorite scene in the entire show.
It's the worst.
I skip any like because I have rewatched Game of Thrones and I skip it. I
hate it.
Even like like House of the Dragon. Like I know a lot of women especially had it like almost like PTSD issues with like some of the birth scenes and stuff like that. I mean, obviously I've never had to go through childbirth, so I can't imagine, obviously what that would be like and stuff like that. But for me, it's like the one scene that's like, oh, dude, and you don't even, obviously we don't see it, but it's just like, but the funny thing is that the Sansa one feels worse somehow, even though it actually happens to Danny in like episode 1 or 2, or even in the books, it sort of happens too. But the Sansa in the show one feels worse. I think it's because we view Sansa as like more innocent, and then obviously like Danny and Khal Drogo end up kind of loving each other. But I mean, it happens to Danny too.
Yeah,
it happens to a lot of females in the series.
Yeah, and the Danny one is tough, and it's tough in the books too. Like that's the one that when people point it out, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it is that's a tough scene. My problem has always been that George ends up catching flack for things that the show did that he didn't do in the books. Like
correct
about Sansa, and like a person of nobility would never have that happen. It's like, well, there is no rape of nobility in these books because remember, Daenerys is in Essos, so like I'm talking about Westeros, because he gets a lot of flack because he. I can go this whole thing, but basically the historical record, it wasn't really like this where everyone's just getting assaulted all the time and yada, yada, yada. But that's the thing. The only person of nobility that I can recall in these books that actually ends up being sexually abused technically is Cersei, because she doesn't actually love Robert. It's a forced marriage. And that did happen that did happen in medieval times.
Certainly.
It probably still, I mean,
oh yeah.
It's a recurring issue is my point. So I get really frustrated when people throw a lot of flack at George for Theon stuff too. That's in the show that isn't in the books, and I just think Sansa has so much to overcome. And then George is doing something really cool here where instead of just saying like Sansa was traumatized because of this, he's actually showing you the effects of that. In a girl who's going through puberty, who is now completely unwilling to admit things to herself and is really just everyone's pawn. And I'm with you. Sansa is one of my favorite characters. I see a lot of new readers because of my book channel on YouTube, and a lot of new readers like Sansa's the worst. She's so annoying. And I'm like, where's your empathy, man? Like she's just a girl.
Yeah. Well, hey, going off that real quick here, if you actually, so the next paragraph we're out here too is we actually get to see a little bit of Sansa's kind of turning the Game of Thrones is beginning to click in her head a little bit here too. After she's kind of done talking to them, right? She says they are children. Sansa thought they're silly little girls, even Eleanor. They've never seen a battle. They've never seen a man die. They know nothing, which is, also remember Jon Snow chapter last time too. Their dreams were full of songs and stories, the way hers had been before Joffrey cut her father's head off. Sansa pitied them. Sansa envied them.
And that is showing the damage. This is showing the damage that Sansa has. She is not like the girls her age, and nor in nobility, nor in just her past traumas. It's a very telling paragraph for sure.
Yeah. And then it just sounds, it goes right back to Marjorie was different though. Sweet and gentle.
Made
Yet there
fun
was
of them for
little
being children, and then
yeah.
has a childlike
Yeah.
infatuation with Marjorie. It's so good.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. The day before the last, she'd taken Sansa hawking. It was the first time that she'd been out side by side the city since the battle. The dead had been burned or buried, but the Mudgate was scarred and splintered, where Lord Stannis' rams had battered it, and the hulls, it just kind of continues on there a little bit. Then they talk a little bit about Willis. He has the best birds in the Seven Kingdoms, Marjorie said when the two of them were briefly alone. He flies an eagle sometimes. You'll see. And then she gives her hand a squeeze and says, sister. Sansa had once dreamt of having a sister like Marjorie, beautiful and gentle, with all the world's graces at her command. Arya had been entirely unsatisfactory as sisters went. How can I let my sister marry Joffrey, she thought, and suddenly her eyes were full of tears. Marjorie, please, you mustn't. You mustn't marry him. He's not like you. He'll hurt you. I shouldn't think so, Marjorie said. So Marjorie smiled confidently. It's brave of you to warn me, but you need not fear. Joff spoiled and vain, and I don't doubt he's as cruel as you say, but father forced him to name Loras of the Kingsguard before he would agree to the match. I shall have the finest knight in the Seven Kingdoms protecting me night and day, as Prince Aemon protected Nerys. So our little lion had best behave, Then it goes on a little bit here. She is so brave, Sansa thought, galloping after her. Her doubts still nod at her. Sir Loras was a great knight, I'll agree, but Joffrey had other Kingsguard and gold cloaks and red cloaks beside, and when he was older, he would command armies of his own. Aegon the Unworthy had never harmed Queen Nerys, perhaps for fear of the brother of the Dragon Knight, but when another of his Kingsguard fell in love with one of his mistress, the king had them both beheaded.
Yeah, so there's a lot here. One of the reasons why I think Marjorie Tyrell is taking her out through these gates is to show her the war-torn land. Now, the bodies are buried, but is this not just a subtle reminder that it's not safe in King's Landing? Like, kind of maybe encouraging Sansa, and then along with calling her sister and talking about how awesome her brother is. I know I'm painting Marjorie in like the worst light. I don't dislike Marjorie, but I do think she's playing the Game of Thrones. And also, one of the reasons why she is so brave about Joffrey is because now we know with full context, and I would assume at this point, Olenna Tyrell had probably already planned to kill Joffrey, right? Like, this is like if she is the
I think so,
poisoner,
because she's already getting the dress ready.
that is why she's so confident. We'll tame the little lion. It's like, yeah, because he's dead.
Yeah.
He's gonna die. And maybe at this point they don't know, but I think the Tyrells had definitely thought about that before pledging that marriage. So it's just funny. And Sansa is worried about her when in all reality she should be worried about herself. And I don't know. It's a tough thing because Sansa has been through so much, but then when she's calling after Marjorie and fawning over her, you see that even though she has all that trauma, she's still a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think, because obviously the Tyrells seem quite confident here, right? We gotta get this dress ready.
Oh, yeah.
They're spending all this time and everything. Marjorie's here. Like you said, don't worry about Joffrey. And then when it all goes down, it's just the downfall of the Tyrells it's just one of those wild
Some for
card
the
things.
history books.
It's just one of those things where George just pulls something out of nowhere with the faith essentially coming in. And it's like, wow, wasn't expecting that whatsoever. And it's kind of like the same. I mean, it happens. It's one of those things where basically the same thing that happens to every character that falls.
Yep.
Is you have to be as cautious as possible the entire way throughout. And then the second they slip up, nope.
Yeah, and I think that the faith stuff is actually far better in the books than it was in the show. Because
way better.
Like Season 6 ending
Way
phenomenal,
better.
but it was rough going for a few weeks there. I remember watching it, and I always thought the books paced it a lot better. And you're right. I think about the Tyrells though. What they're doing here, they're literally going to be getting rid of Joffrey Baratheon to put in Tommen, who they will be able to shape and manipulate. And then they're getting the most passive Stark under their wing as well. Like they will rule the kingdom.
They still actually, in theory, could.
Yes,
Right?
we don't know if
like
the Sept of Baelor blow. We don't know.
we have no idea what's gonna happen with the Tyrells.
Yes, the
In
Tyrells
the
are wide
books.
open. I think me and you have talked about this before, but I see a potential Marjorie trying to get with young Griff and her being beheaded. Because I don't know if you remember Lady Adrian talking about the kind of the similarities between Anne Boleyn and Marjorie Tyrell and how Anne Boleyn was beheaded.
The problem with that is that she's still like gonna marry. She's still like got Tommen, because Tommen
Yeah,
might
Tommen
not.
doesn't.
Tommen might not jump out of a window. Tommen only jumps out of a window because Marjorie dies.
Yeah, it's so hard to think about what Tommen is a wild card because I don't know if I could see George just being like, yeah, this kid jumped out of a window. I don't know. We already got a kid pushed out of a window, but
See, the big one that I've talked about in the past is actually the character that seems most likely to have some roles flipped is Marcella, and Tommen might have their roles completely flipped
I mean,
from
Marcel.
what we saw in the show, because Marcella could be that younger, more beautiful queen. I still kind of think it's going to end up being Jane Westerling, only because of the Maggie the Frog connection to potential, like
Oh, I
that
love
it
that
actually
one. Yeah.
kind of comes from Maggie the Frog's line.
Mhm.
But Marcella could actually be the younger, more beautiful queen that overthrows Cersei.
How
And
interesting.
Marcella could actually be the one who jumps out of the window.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother and Dark Star and
Right.
Dorn. I mean,
We'll get there. I mean, we
yeah,
still,
and
we
the
got
reread we will get there.
lots more chapters to go, but yeah, I just don't. I mean, on one hand, it's like I just don't see George having a 6-year-old jump out of a window. Well, okay, it's also George Martin. He definitely could have a 6-year-old jump out of a window. I mean, he had a baby's head smashed against a wall. I mean, like
Allegedly.
allegedly, right? But I mean, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's sort
Send us
of
your
like
Ravens. What do you think Tommen's going to do and wins a winner? That's what I want to know. I want to know what people think. I wonder if the book community believes that the Sep's going to get blown up. I'm 50-50. I don't know.
I think there's still a lot of foreshadowing for it, just because when Tyrion goes down to meet with the pyromancers, he realizes Cersei
Yeah.
was still the one making it. So what's the
But
what's
also, it's
the
supposed to be in the dragon pit, right? Not the Sept.
right,
So I
right.
don't. But maybe they just moved like
But
the trial to
they
the dragon
they
pit.
yeah, they could move it.
I mean,
So
it could be like Cersei blows up the Sept, and that causes all this unrest, and that's exactly when young Griff comes in with the people's favor, and then his banner's being hoisted, and that's Danny's mummer's dragon. I mean, there's ways for it to work, so I'm not totally against the idea, but we'll see, or maybe we
yeah,
won't. I don't know.
yeah. So, all right, let's continue on here a little bit too. So, so she actually kind of ends up being done with them, right? And then this is when she's gonna end up getting meeting with Sir Dantos here. So we'll sort of continue on a little bit here. So Sansa was surprised that Marjorie did not see it too. She's older than me. She must be wiser. And her father, Lord Tyrell, knows what he's doing. Surely I'm just being silly. Um, when she told Sir Dantos that she was going to Highgarden to marry Willis Tyrell, she thought he would be relieved and pleased for her. Instead, he grabbed her arm and said, "You cannot." In a voice as thick and horror as with wine, "I tell you, these Tyrells are only Lannisters with flowers. I beg of you, forget this folly. Give your Florian a kiss and promise you'll go ahead as we have planned." Yeah. That's another character, honestly, that doesn't get talked about a lot, is Sansa's relationship with Dantos. Here's another like just kind of creepy guy that she has to deal with.
That's what I'm saying. Everybody
And
wants to use her one way or another. Even if
right.
they're
And he
helping her, they're still
and
using.
honestly, even between the two, like Dantos and the Hound, when you look at the two of them, the Hound, even given his like scarred figure, is still like, the Hound is a boss.
The Hound is the only
And
person who has offered to help her without anything in return.
right. Yeah.
He's the knight. He's the real knight.
Yeah. So, yeah, but she has to here to give your Florian a kiss. The night of Joffrey's wedding, that's not so long. Wear the silver hairnet and do as I told you. And afterward, we make our escape. He tried to plant a kiss on her cheek. Ugh, Sansa slipped from his grasp and stepped away from him. I won't. I can't. Something would go wrong. When I wanted to escape, you wouldn't take me. And now I don't need to. So here's also a little bit where Sansa again a little bit here we get to see a little more of Sansa playing the game, working for herself. That's kind of what some of this chapter is.
There's a
I'll be
step in
safe in
growing
High
up.
Garden, she says. Yeah. So she continues on here a bit, and then she starts to think a little bit to herself too. So Sweetling, he told her, you are the heir to Winterfell. He grabbed her again, pleading that she must not do this thing. And Sansa wrenched free and let him sway beneath the heart tree. She had not visited the God's Wood since. So, yeah, and so she stops going too. But she had not forgotten his words either. The heir to Winterfell, she would think as she lay to bed that night. It is your claim they mean to wed. Sansa had grown up with 3 brothers. She never thought to have a claim, but with Bran and Rickon dead, it doesn't matter. There's still Robb, a man grown, and he'll soon wed and have a son. Anyway, Willis Tyrell will have High Garden. What would he want with Winterfell?
And this is Sansa's bias against her home. We all hate our hometown until we get too old and we realize it's not that bad. But this is her going, why would anyone want Winterfell, not realizing that Winterfell is a massive geopolitical pawn, like our piece. Like it's
Yeah.
as good as it gets almost. I mean, it's like Dorne, Winterfell, and then everything between. So this is her bias and her kind of being a little bit immature.
Yeah, and here she keeps thinking about Willis and his leg, but in her mind she can't really like fathom a picture of him because she's never seen him, and she just kind of keeps thinking of Laura. She reminds himself like you shouldn't think about him like that, right? Willis Tyrell was twice her age, she reminded herself, and lame as well, perhaps even plump, red face like his father. He's not going to be the champion. Once she dreamed it was her still marrying Joffrey, not Marjorie, on their wedding night, and he turned to the headsman, ill in pain. She woke trembling. She did not want Marjorie to suffer as she had. I warned her. I did. I told him the truth of him. Perhaps Marjorie did not believe her. And I'm continuing on. She prays to Mother above. She lights a candle the next time she visits the Sept and asks her to protect Marjorie from Joffrey's cruelty, and perhaps a candle to the warrior as well for Loras. She would wear her new gown for the ceremony at the Great Sept of Baelor, she decided, as the seamstress took her last measurement. That must be why Cersei is having it made for me, so I will not look shabby at the wedding. She really ought to have a different gown for the feast afterwards, but she supposed one of her old ones would do. She did not want to risk getting food or wine on the new one. I must take it with me to High Garden. She wanted to look beautiful for Willis Tyrell, even if Dantos was right, and it is Winterfell he wants and not me. He may come to love me for him myself. Sansa hugged herself tightly, wondering how long it would be before the gown was ready. She could scarcely wait to wear it. So yeah, a lot of internal struggling here with Sansa, back and forth. But like we said, there's a little bit of Game of Thrones playing here.
Yeah, she's seeing the pieces, and slowly you see her starting to kind of come to the realization she's compromising on a lot of stuff, and it goes all the way back down to where we began the chapter with the dress. So we built off the dress into a time with Marjorie to going to Dantos to the wedding, and then by the end of the chapter, she's like elated that Marjorie's going to save her, and she's thinking about Willis, right? And then by the end, she's already talked herself into reality of what Willis actually is. And by the end of the chapter, she's sitting alone on her bed, and the only thing she has to truly look forward to is the dress.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful writing. Great chapter structure. So good.
Yeah. So there's a couple little things in here I want to point out. And some of this I found from like ReRead Reddit and stuff like that as well. There's a little like Easter egg I want to get to, but I want to find it in my Kindle here before I pull it up. But this one I thought was really good and really kind of got me thinking about a lot of stuff. So I'll read it here. So I shouldn't think so. Marjorie smiled confidently. As we learn later, this is from Reddit user Prof. Sicily, I guess is his name. Anyway, says, as we learn later, Marjorie's family has taken every possible precaution to ensure her confidence is well founded. As we've been learning chapter after chapter, Joffrey's fate was sealed long before Lord Baelish rode forth to broker a royal marriage. The chapter opens with a knotted string measuring Sansa's womanly figure. She measured Sansa's hips with a length of knotted string, a silk and mirish lace with satin linings. You will be very beautiful. The queen herself has commanded it. So not only her hips, but the inside of her leg and her bosom, which the dressmaker assures Sansa will be as lovely as the queen's. Sansa's it centers on the lovely fabrics promised. Who wouldn't? But the essence of the scene is that Sansa is being gently and inexorably extrapolated by a knotted string. Another use for a knotted string is to make a net. Okay, which it
Mm.
kind of all way them kind of like, they're capturing her here without her really knowing it. And George actually does comment on something like that. And this is a Bran chapter talking about, we know the potential power of a net from the way Summer is brought down by one. So in A Clash of Kings Bran 4, thrashing and nowling at the net, trying to rip free, Summer was only in snarling himself worse. Now he could bite, nor could he bite through it. Let him out. Laughing, the Reed girl threw her arms around the tangled wolf and rolled them both. Summer gave a piteous whine. His legs kicked against the cords that bound them. Mira knelt, undid a twist, pulled out at a corner, tugged deftly here and there, and suddenly the dire wolf was bounding free. So they say, we speculated here that it was Howland Reed's net that enabled Ned to kill the finest knight in the time, Sir Arthur Dane. Perhaps George is trying to underline the point here that Marjorie and Sansa also go in a hunt in the marshes along the bay. We'll see later that Sansa's efforts to free herself from the net that has ensnared her here are in vain, and it will take deft tugs and undoing twists to free her.
Man, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and then also it says she has not visited the Godwoods since, and it says, I wonder if this is something we don't really get here that Varys actually picks up on, because that might be where Varys is perhaps seeing her and spying on her.
Yeah, I think one of the best things that we can do on reread is just thinking about people, like what is left off the page, and like George does such a ridiculously good job of like who knows what. Like knowledge is power in the world, but it's also a really fun way of putting people in weird situations. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things that he has to deal with as a writer, I would imagine. I imagine Wins is also very difficult because you're trying to figure out who knows what and when they figured it out and yada yada yada. But I always try to think about like for instance, what do the Tyrells know when they're having these interactions? And I think it's possible they maybe had an inkling that a red wedding might happen. And I think they probably almost for sure knew they were going to kill Joffrey Baratheon at this point.
Yeah, it's yeah, but that net thing is actually kind of interesting to see, like to think about. So there is a cool little Easter egg here, and I wanted to find it in the chapter. So it's when it's when Marjorie and Sansa are kind of talking to each other, and they're out like hunting or whatever. So the only traffic that was flat-bottomed was the flat-bottom ferry that took them across the river. And while they reached the Kingswood, they found a wilderness of ash and charcoal and dead trees. But the waterfowl teemed in the marshes along the bay. And Sansa's Marilyn brought down 3 ducks, while Marjorie's Peregrine took a heron in full flight. So that's Marjorie's bird or whatever is a peregrine. Peregrine, Peregrine or whatever. But Peregrine took Took is actually Perrin in Lord of the Rings. So it's actually kind of a little it's actually a little Lord of the Rings.
I do know
George. It's actually a little Lord of the Rings Easter egg in there.
I love that.
That's what George does. Yeah.
Well,
So it's spelled the same way, Peregrin, Or
Fantastic.
Pippin, whatever, is actually who, but yeah.
When you said Perrin, I was thinking of Wheel of Time, which
So I
are
know,
there's a Wheel of Time reference, two Wheel of Time references, I
yeah,
believe.
Pippin is, but his actual name is Peregrine Took,
Yes,
but he goes,
Took.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so
Son of
but
a
here it's saying this bird did something, it took something, but it's a little Lord of the Rings reference
Is
there.
that a double entendre? Is that how?
Is
I'm
that
not
what
sure.
that's called? I don't know.
I don't know. Somebody's
I
shaking their head listening to this, going, "What a bunch of morons!"
These people don't even know what the hell they're talking about. Seven hells here. So here's another comment here from the ReRead subreddit. Says small chapter, but we can learn some things. For starters, Sansa cannot keep a secret. From a Game of Thrones with Ned, now with the Tyrells, and in later books, when she gets interested, when the name of John is mentioned, she's an open book. We learned that part of the deal was to put Loras to the Kingsguard to protect Marjorie. We later learned that this was Peter Baelish's idea. But but it's basically saying that Sansa can't keep a secret because she's like, don't marry him. He's terrible. I can't, and is that ever going to come back to bite her? Like the idea of keeping a secret.
I could see it. Maybe the secret is John's heritage at some point. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of secrets. There's so many secrets. She's keeping her identity a secret through the second half of the series.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. I think that's it for some of the comments and stuff. I had, but the deal, like it is kind of interesting. Just the way that they are preparing her here, and we should actually kind of maybe come back to a little bit of this chapter when we get to Purple Wedding, and see the connections that are actually made.
Were there any knotted ropes around?
Yeah.
What kind of birds were there?
Yeah. Interesting. So that's the thing. Sometimes these small chapters, even though there's not a whole lot, sometimes, man, there's a lot. There's a lot to pull from it. So
yeah, it's not pointless. George wrote these very intentionally, and I think that these are some of the most fun chapters. Whenever you think it's just a filler chapter or bridge, like we called it earlier, I think that, look, almost 75 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we talked about some news, and we did some other stuff today too.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So, okay. All right. Well, with that, folks, that's gonna be our episode this week. What are we into next time? Arya 3. Yeah, Arya 3. So anyway, with that, as always, want to thank you guys for playing the Game of Thrones. In our next episode, we will be discussing A Storm of Swords, Arya 3.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave us a comment, or please send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
We will see you next time, and remember that winter is coming.